In the fading grandeur of Thornfield Manor, a gold locket etched with roses vanishes during a bustling estate sale, sparking whispers of theft and family secrets. Miss Jane Marple, with her keen eyes and quiet wisdom, unravels a web of motives, greed, ambition, curiosity, and fear. As suspicions swirl around the auctioneer, a ruthless collector, a probing scholar, and the young heir, Eleanor Winthrop, a shocking truth emerges. The locket hides a scandal, a hidden child, and a daughter's desperate act to protect her mother's legacy. In a village where secrets bloom like roses, only Miss Marple can find the truth before it's lost forever. Chapter 1. The Estate Sale. The late summer sun filtered through the heavy velvet drapes of Thornfield Manor, casting a golden glow across the polished oak floors of the grand drawing-room. The manor, nestled in the quiet folds of St. Mary Mead, had once been the beating heart of the Winthrop family's legacy, its walls adorned with portraits of stern ancestors, and its gardens fragrant with roses. Now it stood forlorn, its faded grandeur exposed to the curious eyes of strangers. The estate sale, organized to settle the debts of the late Sir Henry Winthrop, had drawn a motley crowd. Collectors, neighbours, and bargain hunters, all buzzing like bees around the relics of a bygone era. Miss Jane Marple sat unobtrusively in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, her knitting needles clicking softly, a half-finished shawl resting in her lap. Her neat, bird-like figure was easily overlooked amid the clamour, but her bright eyes missed nothing. She wore a simple tweed skirt and a lavender cardigan, her white hair tucked beneath a modest hat. To the casual observer, she was merely an elderly spinster, fond of gossip and tea. But to those who knew her, Miss Marple's gentle demeanour hid a mind as sharp as a freshly honed blade, attuned to the subtlest shifts in human behaviour. The room was alive with activity. Mr. Percival Sloane, the auctioneer, stood at a mahogany podium, his wiry frame taut with the energy of his trade. His moustache, meticulously trimmed, twitched as he called out bids with practised flourish. Lot 42, a pair of Georgian silver candelabras, who'll start at £50. His voice, smooth and commanding, carried over the murmurs of the crowd. Miss Marple noted the slight sheen of perspiration on his brow, unusual for a man so accustomed to the auctioneer's stage. Was it the heat of the crowded room, or something else? Among the lots displayed on a velvet-draped table was the Winthrop locket, a delicate oval of gold, its surface etched with a tracery of roses. It gleamed under the chandelier's light, drawing admiring glances. Rumour held that it contained a miniature portrait of Lady Winthrop, Sir Henry's mother, a woman of legendary beauty whose tragic death had long been whispered about in the village. The locket's value was not in its modest gold, but in its history, which seemed to pulse with untold stories. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on it, then shifted to the young woman standing nearby, Eleanor Winthrop, the last of the family's direct line. Eleanor, barely 25, had the delicate features of her grandmother, but her expression was one of strain. Her auburn hair was pinned haphazardly, and her hands, clutching a silk shawl, twisted nervously. She hovered near the locket's display, her eyes darting between the crowd and the treasure itself. Miss Marple, with her knack for seeing what others missed, observed the faint tremor in Eleanor's fingers, and the way her lips pressed into a thin line when a bidder approached the table. Was it grief for her family's lost legacy, or something deeper? The crowd was a tapestry of motives. Mrs. Clara Hargrove, a wealthy collector from London, stood out in her tailored emerald dress, her sharp eyes scanning the lots with predatory focus. Her reputation for acquiring rare antiques preceded her, and whispers suggested her methods were not always above board. She lingered near the locket, her gloved hand brushing the table's edge, as she murmured to her companion, a mousy assistant who scribbled notes furiously. Miss Marple wondered what drove Mrs. Hargrove's interest. Was it mere acquisition? Or did she know the locket's hidden worth? Dr. Lawrence Haywood, the village physician, moved through the room with a quiet confidence, his scholarly air softened by a warm smile. His interest in antiques was well known, and he had paused by the locket earlier, peering at it through his spectacles with an intensity that seemed more than casual. A fine piece, he had remarked to no one in particular, his voice carrying a trace of excitement. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, noted his lingering glance and the way he adjusted his cufflinks. A nervous habit, perhaps? As the bidding continued, the air grew thick with anticipation. A mahogany writing desk went to a local squire, and a set of porcelain figurines sparked a lively contest. Miss Marple's needles paused as she watched Eleanor slip away from the locket's display, only to return moments later, her face paler than before. Mr. Sloane announced the next lot, his voice faltering slightly as he glanced at the table. And now, lot of 57, the Winthrop locket. His words trailed off, and a murmur rose from the crowd. The locket was gone. A hush fell, broken only by Mrs. Hargrove's indignant cry. "This is outrageous! I was prepared to bid." Mr. Sloane's face flushed, his hands fumbling with his gavel. "It was here, I assure you," he stammered, his authority unravelling. Dr. Haywood stepped forward, suggesting a calm search, but his eyes were too bright, Miss Marple thought. Eleanor stood frozen, her shawl slipping from her shoulders. The room buzzed with speculation, but Miss Marple remained still, her mind already weaving through the tangle of motives and moments. The vanished locket, she knew, was no mere theft. It was a thread in a much larger tapestry, one she would carefully unravel. Chapter 2. The Disappearance. The drawing-room of Thornfield Manor, moments ago a stage for orderly commerce, descended into a chaos of whispers and sidelong glances. The sudden absence of the Winthrop locket, that delicate gold oval etched with roses, had struck the gathered crowd like a thunderclap. The chandelier's light, which had moments before bathed the room in a warm glow, now seemed to cast sharp shadows, as if conspiring to hide the truth. Miss Jane Marple sat quietly in her corner, her knitting needles stilled in her lap, her keen eyes darting from face to face. The air was thick with accusation, though none dared voice it openly. She sipped her tea, the porcelain cup steady in her hands, and let the scene unfold, knowing that in such moments of disruption, the human heart often revealed its secrets. Mr. Percival Sloane, the auctioneer, stood at the mahogany podium, his wiry frame rigid with shock. His moustache, usually a mark of his polished demeanour, twitched as he fumbled for words. "It was here, I swear it," he declared, his voice cracking like thin ice. He gestured toward the velvet-draped table where the locket had rested, its empty glass case now a silent accusation. The crowd murmured, some craning their necks to see, others exchanging knowing looks. Miss Marple noted the flush creeping up Mr. Sloane's neck, the way his fingers gripped the gavel as if it might anchor him against the rising tide of suspicion. A man of his experience, she thought, should be accustomed to mishaps, yet his agitation was palpable. Was it guilt, or merely the sting of professional failure? Mrs. Clara Hargrove, the wealthy collector, pushed her way to the front, her emerald dress catching the light like a peacock's tail. Her face, powdered and composed, was set in a mask of indignation. "This is intolerable," she exclaimed, her voice carrying the clipped authority of one accustomed to being obeyed. "I came specifically for that locket, and now it's gone. Someone must be held accountable." Her gloved hand gestured toward the empty case, and Miss Marple observed the faint tremor in her fingers, belying her outward composure. Mrs. Hargrove's assistant, a nervous young woman named Miss Finch, hovered behind her, clutching a leather notebook as if it were a shield. Miss Marple wondered if Mrs. Hargrove's outrage stemmed from thwarted ambition or something more personal. Her reputation as a collector was fierce, and whispers in St. Mary Mead suggested she was not above bending ethics to acquire her prizes. Dr. Lawrence Haywood, the village physician, stepped forward with a measured calm that stood in stark contrast to the room's growing unrest. His spectacles glinted as he leaned over the display table, examining the empty case with the precision of a surgeon. "Perhaps it's simply misplaced," he suggested, his voice smooth and reassuring. "A thorough search might resolve this before we leap to conclusions." His suggestion was reasonable, yet Miss Marple noted the way his eyes lingered on the case, as if searching for something beyond the obvious. Dr. Haywood's interest in antiques was well known, and his earlier attention to the locket had not escaped her notice. Was his calm a mark of innocence, or a calculated mask? Eleanor Winthrop, the young heir, stood near the back of the room, her auburn hair slipping from its pins, her silk shawl clutched tightly to her chest. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide with something akin to panic. She had been near the locket's display only moments before its absence was discovered, and now she seemed to shrink from the crowd's scrutiny. Miss Marple watched as Eleanor's gaze darted toward the tall French windows leading to the terrace, as if she longed to flee. The girl's distress was genuine, but Miss Marple, with her years of observing human nature, sensed a deeper current beneath it. Guilt, fear, or perhaps a secret she dared not share. Eleanor's connection to the locket was personal, tied to her family's storied past. Could that tie have driven her to act? The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of curiosity and accusation. A portly gentleman in a tweed suit muttered about shoddy management, while a pair of local matrons whispered that the locket's disappearance was just like the Winthrop curse. Miss Marple, attuned to such gossip, recalled the village tales of Lady Winthrop's tragic fall from a balcony decades ago, an event shrouded in whispers of scandal. The locket, said to hold her miniature, was more than a trinket. It was a relic of that shadowed history. Its theft, if theft it was, felt like a deliberate act, not a random whim. Mr. Sloane, recovering some of his composure, called for order. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We shall conduct a search at once. No one is to leave the room until this matter is resolved." His words, meant to assert control, only heightened the tension. A few bidders protested, citing appointments or indignation, but most stayed, their curiosity outweighing their inconvenience. Miss Marple noted the subtle shifts in posture. Mrs. Hargrove's stiffening shoulders, Doctor. Hayward's quick glance toward the door. Eleanor's step backward into the shadow of a bookcase. Each movement was a thread in the tapestry of suspicion she was beginning to weave. Mrs. Beatrice Winthrop, Eleanor's aunt and the manor's temporary mistress, bustled into the room, her round face flushed with distress. A stout woman in her 50s, she wore a dated lace dress that spoke of better days. "Oh, this is dreadful!" she exclaimed, wringing her hands. "The locket of all things! It's been in the family for generations." She turned to Mr. Sloane, her voice trembling. "How could this happen under your watch?" Her accusation hung in the air. And Mr. Sloane's flush deepened. Miss Marple, invited to the sale as a courtesy due to her acquaintance with Beatrice, observed the older woman's genuine dismay, but also her quick glance toward Eleanor, as if seeking reassurance, or perhaps confirmation of something unspoken. The search began haphazardly. Mr. Sloane, assisted by a pair of manor staff, checked the table and its surroundings, lifting velvet cloths and peering beneath furniture. Mrs. Hargrove insisted on inspecting the case herself, her sharp eyes gunning for any sign of tampering. Dr. Hayward offered to assist, his hands steady as he examined the lock, which showed no signs of force. "Curious," he murmured, almost to himself. "It's as if the locket simply vanished." Miss Marple, remaining in her chair, watched the proceedings with quiet intensity. The lock's intact state suggested either a key or a sleight of hand, and she recalled Mr. Sloane's earlier handling of the locket to check its clasp. Had he unlocked the case then, or was someone else adept at such subtlety? Eleanor, pressed by her aunt to join the search, moved reluctantly toward the table, her hands trembling as she lifted a stray bidding paddle. Her eyes avoided the crowd, and Miss Marple noted the way she kept her shawl drawn close, as if shielding something. The girl's behavior was not that of a casual bystander, and Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the locket's significance. Was it merely a family heirloom, or did it hold a secret Eleanor wished to protect? The girl's nervous demeanour reminded Miss Marple of young Clara Bantry, a village girl who, years ago, had hidden a stolen brooch out of fear of her mother's wrath. The parallel was striking, though Miss Marple knew better than to assume too much too soon. As the search yielded nothing, the crowd's restlessness grew. A young man in a cheap suit suggested calling the police. A proposal met with reluctant agreement. Mr. Sloane, his authority fraying, dispatched a servant to fetch Inspector Craddock, the local officer known for his methodical, if uninspired, approach. Miss Marple, familiar with Craddock's work, knew he would rely on fingerprints and statements, but the locket's disappearance felt too deliberate for such straightforward methods. She leaned back in her chair, her knitting untouched, and considered the players in this drama. Each had been near the locket, each had opportunity, but motive remained elusive. Mrs. Hargrove, tiring of the search, turned her ire on Mr. Sloane. "You must have insurance for such losses," she snapped, her voice cutting through the room. "Or do you expect us to believe this is mere incompetence?" Her words drew a few nods from the crowd. "And Mr. Sloane bristled. "Madam, I assure you, my firm is above reproach." The locket was secure until moments ago. His defense was vehement, but Miss Marple caught the flicker of unease in his eyes. Had he been careless, or was he hiding something more? Dr. Hayward, meanwhile, conversed quietly with a local antiques dealer, his tone academic but his posture alert. Miss Marple overheard a fragment of their talk, something about the Locket's craftsmanship and its possible origins in Victorian London. The doctor's knowledge was impressive, but was it scholarly curiosity? Or did he know more about the Locket's value than he let on? She recalled his earlier comment about Lady Winthrop's death, a tragedy that had left lingering questions in the village. Did the Locket tie to that event, and if so, how? Beatrice Winthrop, wringing her hands, approached Miss Marple, her voice low. "Oh, Jane, what a calamity! That locket was dear to my brother, and to Eleanor. What will people think?" Miss Marple patted her hand, her tone soothing. There, Beatrice. These things have a way of sorting themselves out. Perhaps someone simply picked it up by mistake." Her words were kind, but her mind was elsewhere, sifting through the morning's events. She recalled the moment Eleanor had slipped away from the display, returning with a flushed face. Had she been in the kitchen, as she later claimed, or somewhere closer to the locket? As the crowd waited for the police, the atmosphere grew stifling. Miss Marple rose, her movements slow but deliberate, and approached the display table. She peered at the empty case, noting its simple brass lock and the faint scratches around it, barely visible. They could be from age or from careful manipulation. She glanced at Mr. Sloane, who was now conferring with a staff member, his gestures sharp. Mrs. Hargrove stood nearby, her assistant scribbling furiously while Dr. Hayward lingered by a bookshelf, his expression unreadable. Eleanor had retreated to a corner, her shawl still clutched tightly. Miss Marple returned to her chair, her mind a whirl of possibilities. The locket's disappearance was no accident, she was certain. It was a calculated act, born of motive she had yet to uncover. Was it greed, as Mrs. Hargrove's ambition suggested? Professional sabotage, as Mr. Sloane's agitation hinted? Curiosity, as Dr. Hayward's interest implied? Or something deeper, tied to Eleanor's nervous glances and the Winthrop family's shadowed past? The answer, she knew, lay in the subtle details. The twitch of a hand, the flicker of an eye, the weight of a secret carried too long. As the distant sound of a police car approached, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her needles clicking softly, a quiet counterpoint to the storm brewing in Thornfield Manor. Chapter 3. The Suspects. The drawing-room of Thornfield Manor, still heavy with the shock of the Locket's disappearance, seemed to hold its breath as Inspector Craddock arrived. He was a solid man, broad-shouldered and methodical, his face etched with the weary pragmatism of one accustomed to village squabbles rather than grand mysteries. His uniform, crisp despite the late summer heat, lent him an air of authority, but Miss Jane Marple, seated unobtrusively with her knitting, knew his methods leaned toward the obvious: fingerprints, alibis, and straightforward questioning. This theft, she sensed, would demand a subtler touch. As Craddock surveyed the room, his notebook already open, Miss Marple's eyes flitted across the four figures now at the heart of the affair. Mr. Percival Sloane, Mrs. Clara Hargrove, Dr. Lawrence Hayward, and young Eleanor Winthrop. Each, she thought, was a study in contrasts, their motives tangled like threads in a skein. Inspector Craddock began with a brisk announcement. "No one leaves until we've taken statements," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "This is a theft, plain and simple, and we'll get to the bottom of it." He stationed a young constable by the door and began questioning the crowd, starting with the manor staff. Miss Marple, invited to stay by Mrs. Beatrice Winthrop, who fluttered anxiously nearby, settled deeper into her chair. She had no official role, but Beatrice's trust in her good sense ensured her presence, and Miss Marple was content to observe, her mind sifting through the morning's events like a gardener turning soil. Mr. Percival Sloane, the auctioneer, was the first to draw her attention. He stood by the podium, attempting to regain his composure, though his hands betrayed him, fidgeting with a pen as Craddock approached. His wiry frame seemed taut, like a bowstring ready to snap, and his moustache quivered as he spoke. "I locked the case myself," he insisted, his voice clipped. "I checked the locket at 10:30, just before the bidding began. It was secure." Craddock scribbled this down, asking about keys. "Only I have access," Sloane replied, producing a small brass key from his waistcoat pocket. Miss Marple noted the speed of his answer as if rehearsed, and recalled the faint tobacco scent on his coat. A detail odd for a man who claimed not to smoke. In St. Mary Mead, she knew, reputations could be polished like silver, hiding tarnish beneath it. Sloane's firm, Sloane and Sons, was respected, but whispers of sharp dealings followed him. Had the locket's value tempted him to cross a line? Mrs. Clara Hargrove, the collector, stood apart, her emerald dress a vivid contrast to the room's muted tones. Her face was a mask of controlled fury as she gave her statement to Craddock. "I was bidding on a porcelain vase when the locket vanished," she said, her tone sharp as cut glass. "I had every intention of acquiring it. This is a disgrace." Her assistant, Miss Finch, nodded vigorously, her notebook clutched tightly. Miss Marple observed the older woman's poise, but also the way her gloved hands twisted together when she thought no one was watching. Mrs. Hargrove's wealth was vast, her collection legendary, but village gossip hinted at a murky past, perhaps a scandal in London, hushed up with money. The locket, with its rumoured connection to Lady Winthrop, might hold more than sentimental value for her. Was it a prize to add to her trove, or something she needed to possess for reasons unspoken? Dr. Lawrence Hayward, the physician, was next, his manner calm and cooperative. He leaned against a bookcase, his spectacles catching the light as he spoke to Craddock. "I was near the display earlier, admiring the craftsmanship," he admitted, his voice steady, "but I was across the room when the theft occurred, discussing a Chippendale chair with Mr. Grayson." The antiques dealer, standing nearby, confirmed this, though Miss Marple noted the slight hesitation in his nod. Hayward's interest in antiques was no secret. He often lectured at the village hall on Victorian curiosities, but his knowledge of the Winthrop family seemed unusually deep. She recalled his earlier remark about Lady Winthrop's death, a tragedy that had left questions unanswered. His calm demeanour was reassuring, but Miss Marple knew that still waters often hid strong currents. Was his interest in the locket purely academic, or did it mask a more personal curiosity? Eleanor Winthrop, the heir, was the last to be questioned, and her reluctance was palpable. She stood by the French windows, her auburn hair falling loose, her silk shawl drawn tightly around her slender frame. "I was in the kitchen, fetching tea for Aunt Beatrice," she told Craddock, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't see anything." Her eyes, wide and dark, avoided his, and Miss Marple noted the faint tremor in her hands. A maid bustling past with a tray later contradicted this, mentioning she'd seen Eleanor near the display table just before the locket vanished. The discrepancy was small, but to Miss Marple, it was a crack in the girl's story. Eleanor's connection to the locket was undeniable. Her grandmother's legacy, tied to a family history steeped in whispers. Was her distress born of loss, or fear of discovery? As Craddock moved on to question minor guests, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the locket itself. Its gold was modest, its craftsmanship fine, but not extraordinary. Its true value lay in what it held, the rumoured miniature of Lady Winthrop, or perhaps something else. Village tales spoke of her beauty, her strictness, and her untimely death, a fall from a balcony that some called an accident, others something darker. The locket, Miss Marple mused, might be a key to that mystery, a secret someone wished to keep hidden. Each suspect had been near the display, each had opportunity, but motive was the puzzle's heart. She considered Mr. Sloane first. His agitation suggested more than professional embarrassment. The tobacco scent lingered in her mind, a clue that didn't fit his polished image. Had he planned to pocket the locket, perhaps to sell it privately? Auctioneers, she knew from a case in St. Mary Mead years ago, could be tempted by quick profit. Yet his insistence on the locked case felt genuine, and the key in his pocket was a point in his favour, or a clever misdirection. Mrs. Hargrove's ambition was clearer. Her hunger for antiques was matched only by her ruthlessness, or so the village gossips claimed. Miss Marple recalled a story of a rival collector, outbid and humiliated at a London auction, Mrs. Hargrove's doing, some said. The locket's historical significance would appeal to her, but was there more? Her quick accusation of Sloane suggested a need to deflect attention, and Miss Marple wondered about the gold chain she'd glimpsed in Mrs. Hargrove's room at the inn. So like the lockets. Dr. Hayward's scholarly air was disarming, but Miss Marple knew better than to trust appearances. His knowledge of the Winthrop family hinted at a deeper interest, perhaps tied to the locket's contents. She remembered a young curate in her village years ago, whose mild manner hid a fascination with scandal. Hayward's suggestion of a search had been practical, but his lingering glance at the case suggested more than passing curiosity. Was he seeking knowledge, or something to leverage? Eleanor's behaviour was the most troubling. Her nervous glances, her contradicted alibi, her proximity to the locket, all pointed to involvement. Yet her distress seemed rooted in something beyond theft. Miss Marple thought of a girl she'd known, who had hidden a family letter to protect her mother's reputation. Eleanor's attachment to the locket, tied to her grandmother's memory, might drive her to desperate acts. But what secret could be so dire as to warrant theft? Craddock finished his initial inquiries, his notebook filled with statements that Miss Marple knew would yield little. The lock was intact, no fingerprints were found, and the crowd's accounts were a muddle of half-observed moments. He announced a more thorough search of the manor, but Miss Marple doubted the locket would be found so easily. It was hidden, she suspected, not in a drawer or pocket, but in someone's heart, guarded by fear or greed. Mrs. Beatrice Winthrop approached, her face creased with worry. "Jane, what do you make of this?" she whispered. glancing at Eleanor, who stood alone by the window. "It's so unlike her to be so shaken." Miss Marple smiled gently. "People surprise us, Beatrice, when something dear is at stake." Her words were vague, but her mind was sharp, already tracing the threads of motive and opportunity. As Craddock organized his search, she resumed her knitting, the soft click of her needles a quiet rhythm against the room's tension. The locket, she knew, was more than gold. It was a cipher to a truth someone wished to bury, and she would unravel it, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 4. The Auctioneer's Tale. The late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Thornfield Manor, casting long, wavering shadows across the polished floors. The crowd had dispersed, sent home by Inspector Craddock with promises of further inquiries, leaving the chic drawing-room quiet save for the occasional creak of the old house settling. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting folded neatly in her lap, had lingered at the invitation of Mrs. Beatrice Winthrop, who was now upstairs consoling a tearful Eleanor. The manor felt hollow, its grandeur diminished by the day's upheaval, yet Miss Marple sensed the air still thrummed with secrets. She had decided to begin her quiet investigations with Mr. Percival Sloane, the auctioneer, whose agitation over the locket's disappearance struck her as more than professional chagrin. She found him in the manor's pantry, a narrow room off the kitchen where silverware and crystal were being catalogued for the next day's sale. Mr. Sloane stood alone, polishing a tarnished candlestick with a vigour that seemed more about distraction than necessity. His wiry frame was hunched, his moustache drooping slightly, and his eyes darted to the door as Miss Marple entered, her steps soft but deliberate. "Oh, Miss Marple," he said, forcing a smile that did not reach his eyes. "I didn't expect anyone here." "Just tidying up, you know." His voice was tight, like a violin string overtuned, and Miss Marple noted the faint tremble in his hands as he set the candlestick down. "I thought we might have a little chat, Mr. Sloane," she said, her tone as mild as a summer breeze. She settled onto a wooden stool, her lavender cardigan neatly buttoned, her eyes bright with gentle curiosity. "Such a dreadful business about the locket. It must be quite a blow to your reputation." Her words were sympathetic, but her gaze was steady, watching for the flicker of truth beneath his polished exterior. Sloane's face stiffened, and he wiped his hands on a cloth, leaving a smear of polish. 20 years I've run auctions, Miss Marple, and never lost a lot. Never his voice carried a defensive edge, as if he were arguing with himself as much as with her. "That locket was locked in its case. I checked it myself at 10:30, clasp and all. Someone must have tampered with it during the bidding." He gestured vaguely toward the drawing-room, his fingers twitching. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of polite interest, but her mind caught on his insistence. The locked case, the brass key he'd shown Craddock, both were facts, yet they felt like pieces of a puzzle arranged to mislead. "You handled the locket yourself, then?" she asked, her voice soft as she adjusted her spectacles. "Such a lovely piece. I suppose you know its history." She tilted her head, her question innocent but probing, like a needle slipping through fabric. Sloane hesitated, his eyes flickering to the side before returning to her. "Just a trinket, really," he said too quickly. "Family heirloom, gold, Victorian, nothing extraordinary." His dismissal was casual, but Miss Marple caught the strain in his jaw. the way his hand tightened on the cloth. He knew more, she was certain, than he was, letting on. She leaned forward slightly, her knitting needles glinting in the dim light. "I've always found old jewellery fascinating," she said, as if sharing a village anecdote. "In Saint Mary Mead we had a case once, a brooch, quite plain, but it held a secret compartment. The owner's daughter hid a letter inside to keep it from her father. So clever, don't you think?" Her story was light, almost whimsical, but her eyes watched Sloane closely. His flush deepened, and he busied himself with another candlestick, polishing it with unnecessary force. "No compartments in this locket," he muttered. "Just a miniature, or so they say." Miss Marple smiled, her expression serene. "Of course. But it's curious, isn't it, how such small things can stir such trouble?" She paused, letting the silence settle. Sloane's discomfort was palpable, and she recalled the faint scent of tobacco on his coat during the auction, a detail that jarred with his claim of being a non-smoker. In her village, she'd known a grocer who smoked in secret to hide his habit from a disapproving wife. Such small lies, she thought, often led to larger ones. "Do you often smoke, Mr. Sloane?" she asked, her tone as casual as if she were inquiring about the weather. He started, nearly dropping the candlestick. "Smoke? No, never. Bad for the lungs, and the clients don't like it." His denial was swift, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of alarm. Miss Marple nodded, as if satisfied, but her mind filed the detail away. The tobacco scent suggested a connection, perhaps to a place, a person, or a habit he wished to conceal. Had he been somewhere he shouldn't, perhaps handling the locket in private? She thought of the cigar lounge in nearby Danemouth, known for its distinctive paper wrappers, and wondered if Sloane frequented it. Changing tack, she said, "You must know the Winthrop family well, handling their estate." Poor Eleanor seemed so distraught. Her voice was sympathetic, but her question was a gentle prod, testing Sloane's knowledge of the family's secrets. He shrugged, his movements jerky. "Met them only for the sale." "Miss Winthrop's a quiet sort. Keeps to herself. Her aunt's the one who hired me." His tone was dismissive, but Miss Marple noted the way his eyes avoided hers, as if he feared she might see too much. She recalled Eleanor's nervous hovering near the locket's display, and wondered if Sloane had noticed it too, or if he had a reason to deflect attention from her. As they spoke, a young footman entered, carrying a tray of silver spoons to be catalogued. Sloane seized the interruption, turning to the boy with exaggerated focus. "Careful with those, lad. They're worth more than your wages." The footman nodded, blushing, and Miss Marple took the opportunity to observe Sloane's hands, well groomed, but with a faint stain of ink on his fingers, as if he'd been writing hurriedly. A ledger, perhaps, or something less innocent? She made a mental note to inquire about his records later. "Tell me, mister." "Sloane," she said, rising from the stool with a slight creak, "do you ever find items go missing before a sale? A mix-up, perhaps, in the bustle?" Her question was gentle, but it landed like a stone in still water. Sloane's face paled, and he set the candlestick down with a clatter. "Never," he said, his voice sharp. "My firm is meticulous. This is the first time, and I'll wager it's no fault of mine." His indignation was convincing, but Miss Marple's experience told her that such vehemence often masked unease. She thanked him, her smile as warm as ever, and left the pantry, her mind turning over the encounter. Outside, the manor's gardens were bathed in the soft glow of dusk, the roses casting a faint perfume into the air. Miss Marple paused by a stone bench, her thoughts on Sloane. His agitation, his quick denials, the tobacco scent, all were threads in a pattern she could not yet fully discern. He had opportunity, certainly, having handled the locket and possessed the key. But his motive was unclear. Was it greed, as village gossip about his sharp dealings suggested? Or was he a pawn in a larger scheme, perhaps manipulated by someone who knew the locket's true value? She thought of the locket's rumoured contents. A miniature of Lady Winthrop, or so the story went. But Sloane's dismissal of it as just a trinket felt too practised, as if he were downplaying its significance. Miss Marple knew from past cases that small objects often held great secrets. In St. Mary Mead, a locket much like this one had contained a photograph that unravelled a family scandal. Could this locket hold something similar? A truth Sloane wished to exploit or conceal? As she walked back toward the manor, Miss Marple's mind turned to the other suspects. Mrs. Hargrove's ambition doctor, Hayward's curiosity, Eleanor's distress. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but Sloane's role was pivotal. His access to the locket made him a likely candidate, yet his agitation suggested he was as surprised by its disappearance as anyone. Was he a thief caught off guard, or a man entangled in someone else's plot? The tobacco scent lingered in her thoughts, a clue that might lead to a place, a person, or a motive. She resolved to visit the Denmouth Cigar Lounge, or at least inquire about its patrons, and to keep a close eye on Mr. Sloane's movements. Inside, the manor was quiet, the staff moving softly as they prepared for the evening. Miss Marple returned to the drawing-room, where Inspector Craddock was conferring with a constable, his notebook still open. She settled back into her chair. Her knitting resumed, the soft click of her needles a steady rhythm. The locket, she knew, was not far, hidden perhaps, but not lost. And Mr. Sloane, with his nervous hands and guarded words, was a thread she would follow, one careful stitch at a time, until the truth lay bare. Chapter 5. The Buyer's Ambition. The village inn at St. Mary Mead, a quaint establishment with ivy-clad walls and a low-beam tap-room, was a hub of gossip in the wake of the locket's disappearance from Thornfield Manor. By the following morning, the theft was the talk of every parlour and pub, with theories ranging from a ghostly curse to a cunning pickpocket. Miss Jane Marple, undeterred by such chatter, made her way to the inn, her black handbag swinging lightly at her side, her lavender cardigan buttoned against the crisp September air. She had resolved to speak with Mrs. Clara Hargrove, the wealthy collector whose indignation at the auction had been as sharp as her tailored emerald dress. If anyone had a motive rooted in desire for the locket, Miss Marple thought, it was this woman, whose reputation for acquiring rarities was as formidable as her presence. The inn's parlour, with its chintz curtains and polished oak table, was quiet save for the soft clink of teacups, as the landlord's wife served a handful of guests. Mrs. Hargrove had taken a private suite upstairs, a fact Miss Marple learned from the innkeeper, with a few well-placed questions and a kindly smile. She knocked softly on the door, and after a moment it opened to reveal Miss Finch, Mrs. Hargrove's mousy assistant, her eyes wary behind round spectacles. "Mrs. Hargrove is resting," Miss Finch said, her voice high and nervous, but a sharp call from within cut her off. "Let her in, Finch. I'm not an invalid." The assistant stepped aside, and Miss Marple entered, her steps as measured as her thoughts. The suite was a study in opulence, cluttered with treasures that spoke of Mrs. Hargrove's obsession. A gilt-framed mirror leaned against one wall, a pair of porcelain figurines stood on a sideboard, and a velvet-lined box held a tangle of jewellery that glinted in the morning light. Mrs. Hargrove sat at a small writing desk, her posture regal despite the informality of the setting. Her emerald dress had been replaced by a silk blouse and a strand of pearls, but her eyes were as piercing as ever. "Miss Marple, is it?" she said, her tone cool but not unkind. "I suppose you're here about that wretched locket." A fine mess Sloane's made of things. She gestured to a chair, and Miss Marple sat, her hands folded neatly over her handbag. "I do hope I'm not intruding," Miss Marple said, her voice as gentle as a summer breeze. "But such a curious affair, don't you think? The locket vanishing in a room full of people. I couldn't help but wonder what drew you to it." Her question was soft, almost incidental, but her eyes were bright, watching Mrs. Hargrove's face for the slightest shift. The collector's lips tightened, and she leaned back, her fingers brushing the pearls at her throat. "It's a fine piece," she said, "Victorian gold with a certain charm. I collect such things." As you might have heard, her tone was dismissive, but Miss Marple caught the faint edge of defensiveness, as if the question had grazed a nerve. She glanced around the room, her gaze lingering on a small table where a velvet cloth partially covered a pile of trinkets. Beneath it, she glimpsed the glint of a gold chain, not unlike the locket's delicate links. "How lovely," she said, nodding toward the table. "You have quite a collection already. Is that another locket, perhaps?" Her tone was innocent, but the question landed like a pebble in a still pond. Mrs. Hargrove's hand stilled on her pearls, and Miss Finch, hovering nearby, let out a small gasp before catching herself. "Just a trinket," Mrs. Hargrove said quickly, rising to adjust the cloth, covering the chain completely. "Nothing like the Winthrop piece. A mere coincidence?" Her smile was tight, and Miss Marple noted the way her fingers lingered on the cloth, as if ensuring it stayed in place. Returning to her seat, Mrs. Hargrove fixed Miss Marple with a sharp look. "I was bidding on a vase when the locket vanished," she said, unprompted. "Finch can confirm it. I had every intention of acquiring it, but I wasn't near the display. This is Sloane's failure, not mine." Her voice was firm, but Miss Marple detected a tremor, a hint of unease that belied her confidence. She thought of a woman in St. Mary Mead, Mrs. Carter, who had once protested her innocence in a theft with similar vehemence, only to be found with the stolen goods hidden in her garden shed. Mrs. Hargrove's alibi was plausible, but the gold chain nagged at Miss Marple's mind. Was it truly a coincidence, or a clue to her intentions? "I'm sure you were terribly disappointed," Miss Marple said, her tone sympathetic. "To come all this way for such a piece, only to have it slip away. It must be frustrating, especially for someone with your determination." The word was chosen with care, and Mrs. Hargrove's eyes narrowed slightly, as if sensing the probe beneath the politeness. "I get what I want, Miss Marple," she said, her voice low, "but I don't stoop to theft. If I'd taken it, I'd have paid for it first." Her words were bold, but Miss Marple noted the way her gaze flicked to Miss Finch, who stood silently, her notebook clutched like a talisman. Was the assistant a witness? or a conspirator?" Miss Marple shifted the conversation, her voice as light as ever. "You must know a great deal about the Winthrop family coming for their locket. Such an old family with so many stories." She paused, her eyes soft but searching. Mrs. Hargrove's expression hardened, and she leaned forward, her pearls clicking softly. "I know what everyone knows," she said. "Lady Winthrop was a beauty, died tragically, left a legacy of trinkets like that locket. I'm interested in the art, not the gossip." Her dismissal was crisp, but Miss Marple caught the slight flush in her cheeks, a sign of discomfort. Their collector's knowledge, she suspected, went beyond what everyone knows. Had she researched the locket's history, perhaps uncovering a secret that made it more than a mere collectible? As they spoke, Miss Finch dropped her pencil, the clatter breaking the tension. She scrambled to retrieve it, her face flushed, and Miss Marple noted the assistant's nervousness. Was it merely her nature, or did she know something about her employer's plans? Miss Marple recalled a maid in her village, timid as a mouse, who had known of her mistress's theft but feared to speak. Miss Finch, she thought, might be worth a quiet word later, away from Mrs. Hargrove's commanding presence. "I do hope the police find the locket soon," Miss Marple said, rising with a small smile. "It would be such a shame for it to be lost forever. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Hargrove." She moved toward the door, her steps slow, giving the collector a moment to react. Mrs. Hargrove's voice followed her, sharp and sudden. "If you're playing detective, Miss Marple, you'd do better to look at Sloane." He had the key, after all. The accusation was pointed, and Miss Marple nodded, her expression unchanged. "Oh, I'm no detective," she said lightly, "just an old woman who likes to understand things." As she descended the inn's narrow stairs, Miss Marple's mind was busy. Mrs. Hargrove's ambition was clear. Her hunger for the locket was almost palpable, and the gold chain in her room suggested she might have planned to acquire it by means less than honest. Yet her quick alibi and her deflection towards Sloane felt too practiced, as if she were steering suspicion elsewhere. Miss Marple thought of the locket's rumoured miniature, said to depict Lady Winthrop. Could Mrs. Hargrove know something about its contents? Perhaps a detail that made it worth more than gold. The collector's wealth gave her power, but also enemies. And Miss Marple wondered if her pursuit of the locket was driven by more than vanity. Outside, the village square was bustling, with villagers exchanging theories about the theft. Miss Marple paused by the inn's gate, her thoughts on Mrs. Hargrove's suite. The gold chain was a small clue, but significant. Had she acquired it as a substitute, or was it part of a larger plan? She recalled Mrs. Hargrove's twitch of unease, the way Miss Finch had flinched at the mention of the chain. There was a connection there, she was certain, but it was not yet clear. As she walked back to her cottage, her black shoes tapping softly on the cobblestones, Miss Marple resolved to learn more about Mrs. Hargrove's past, perhaps through the village grapevine, or a discreet inquiry in London. The locket, she knew, was a key to a larger truth, and Mrs. Hargrove's ambition was a thread she would follow, one careful step at a time. Chapter 6. The Guest's Curiosity. The morning sun cast a soft glow over Thornfield Manor, its rays filtering through the mist that clung to the gardens, giving the estate an air of quiet mystery. Inside, the manor was subdued, the bustle of the auction replaced by an uneasy calm as the search for the missing locket continued. Miss Jane Marple, her black handbag tucked under her arm, had returned to the manor at the invitation of Mrs. Beatrice Winthrop, who was growing increasingly fretful about the scandal's impact on the family name. Miss Marple, however, was focused on Dr. Lawrence Haywood, the village physician whose scholarly interest in the locket had caught her attention. His calm demeanour and pointed remarks about the Winthrop family suggested a curiosity that might run deeper than mere academic interest, and she resolved to speak with him, her mind alert for the subtle clues that often lay hidden in casual conversation. She found Dr. Haywood in the manor's library, a grand room lined with leather-bound volumes and heavy oak shelves, their contents dusted with the neglect of years. He stood by a window, leafing through a book on Victorian jewellery, his spectacles perched low on his nose. His tweed jacket was slightly rumpled, and his greying hair caught the light as he turned a page with deliberate care. The room smelled of old paper and beeswax, and Miss Marple's soft footsteps barely disturbed the silence as she approached. "Dr. Haywood," she said, her voice as gentle as a village breeze, "I hope I'm not interrupting. Such a fascinating collection of books here. Do you often find treasures in them?" He looked up, his expression warm but guarded, and closed the book with a soft thud. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth and measured. "No interruption at all. I was just indulging my hobby. Old jewellery, you know, holds such stories." He gestured to the book, its cover embossed with gilt, and smiled. "The Winthrops have quite a library." I couldn't resist. Miss Marple nodded, settling into a nearby armchair, her lavender cardigan neatly buttoned, her eyes bright with interest. She noted the title of the book, Victorian Keepsakes, a Study in Sentiment, and the way Haywood's fingers lingered on its spine, as if reluctant to set it aside. "I've always thought jewellery tells more than its wearer intends," she said, her tone light but probing. "That locket, for instance, so delicate, yet it's caused such a stir. You seemed quite taken with it at the auction." Her words were casual, but her gaze was steady, watching for the flicker of reaction that often betrayed hidden thoughts. Haywood's smile remained, but his eyes narrowed slightly, a shift so subtle most would miss it. "It's a fine piece," he said, adjusting his spectacles. "Gold, mid-Victorian, likely made in London. The rose engraving suggests a personal touch, perhaps a gift. I was merely admiring its craftsmanship." His explanation was polished, but Miss Marple caught the careful precision of his words, as if he were measuring each bun. She tilted her head, her expression one of polite curiosity. "You know so much about it," she said, "almost as if you'd studied the Winthrop family before the sale." Her comment was gentle, but it landed like a soft dart, and Haywood's hand paused on the book, his fingers tightening briefly. "I'm a student of history," he replied, his tone still even. "The Winthrops are part of St. Mary Mead's story, and their artifacts are illuminating." He turned to the window, as if to study the garden, but Miss Marple sensed he was avoiding her gaze. She recalled his remark at the auction about Lady Winthrop's tragic death, a fall from a balcony, shrouded in the village whispers of scandal. His knowledge seemed more than casual, and she wondered what drove his interest. Leaning forward slightly, she said, "I suppose you've heard the tales about Lady Winthrop. Such a sad story, her fall. The locket, they say, holds her miniature. Do you think there's more to it?" Her question was innocent, but her eyes were sharp, noting the way Haywood's shoulders stiffened, his hand brushing his cufflinks, a nervous habit she'd observed before. "Village gossip," he said with a small laugh. "The locket likely holds a portrait, as they often do." But the Winthrops were private people. Who knows what they kept hidden? His tone was dismissive, but Miss Marple caught a flicker of intensity in his eyes, as if the question had stirred something beneath his calm exterior. She shifted the conversation, her voice as soft as ever. "In my village, we once had a doctor. Simmons, such a kind man, who collected old medical journals. He found the most curious things in them, secrets about families long gone. I suppose antiques like journals can reveal so much." Her story was a gentle lure, and Haywood's smile returned, though it seemed strained. "Indeed," he said, "objects carry history, if you know where to look." He set the book down, his movements deliberate, and Miss Marple noted a faint tremor in his hand, as if her probing had unsettled him. As they spoke, Eleanor Winthrop passed by the library door, her auburn hair loose, her face pale. She glanced in, her eyes meeting Haywood's for a moment before she hurried on, her silk shawl trailing behind her. Miss Marple caught the exchange, a brief charged look that spoke of recognition, or perhaps unease. Haywood's expression remained composed, but his fingers brushed his cufflinks again, and Miss Marple filed the moment away. Had Eleanor reacted to his presence, or to something he knew? She recalled the girl's nervous hovering near the Locket's display, and wondered if Haywood's curiosity had intersected with her distress. "You were at the auction when the locket vanished," Miss Marple said, her tone conversational. "Such a crowded room, yet no one saw a thing. Where were you, if I may ask?" Her question was polite, but her eyes were keen, watching for the telltale signs of evasion. Haywood leaned against the bookcase, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. "I was across the room, discussing a Chippendale chair with Mr. Grayson, the dealer," he said. "I only heard the commotion when Sloane announced the theft." His alibi matched what he'd told Craddock, but Miss Marple noted the precision of his words as if he'd rehearsed them. She thought of a young man in St. Mary Mead, a vicar's son, whose calm explanations had hidden a theft until a single slip betrayed him. Was Haywood's composure a mask? She rose, smoothing her cardigan, and smiled. "You must find all this quite exciting, Doctor." "Haywood, with your love of history, I do hope the locket turns up soon." Her words were kind, but her mind was busy, turning over his responses. As she moved toward the door, she paused, glancing at the book on the table. "That book looks most interesting," she said. "Might I borrow it later?" "I'm sure it's full of insights." Haywood hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, Miss Marple. I'll leave it here for you." His voice was polite, but Miss Marple sensed a reluctance, as if the book held more than he wished to share. Outside the library, the manor's halls were quiet, the staff moving softly as they prepared for the day's limited auction. Miss Marple paused by a window, her thoughts on Haywood. His knowledge of the locket and the Winthrop family was too deep for a casual observer, and his reaction to Eleanor's glance suggested a connection she had yet to unravel. The book on Victorian jewellery was a clue. Perhaps it contained details about lockets like the Winthrops, or even the family itself. She recalled his mention of Lady Winthrop's death, a tragedy that lingered in village memory like a half-forgotten tune. Did Heywood know something about that event? Or was he seeking it in the locket's contents? She thought of the other suspects. Mr. Sloane's agitation, Mrs. Hargrove's ambition, Eleanor's distress. But Heywood's curiosity stood out, a thread of intellectual pursuit that might hide a darker motive. Was he merely a scholar, or was he chasing a secret tied to the Winthrop legacy? His calm demeanour was a challenge, but Miss Marple knew that even the quietest minds could harbour secrets. She resolved to learn more about his studies, perhaps through the Village Historical Society, or a discreet chat with Mr. Grayson, the antiques dealer. As she walked toward the drawing room, where Beatrice was waiting, Miss Marple's mind turned to the locket itself. Its rose engraving, its rumoured miniature, both pointed to a personal history, perhaps one Heywood was eager to uncover. The truth, she knew, lay in the intersections of these lives: Sloane's key, Hargrove's chain, Eleanor's fear, and Heywood's knowledge. With each conversation the pattern grew clearer, and Miss Marple's knitting, tucked in her bag, seemed to mirror her. Thoughts, each stitch a step closer to the heart of the mystery. Chapter 7. The Heir's Burden. The late morning sun bathed the rose garden of Thornfield Manor in a golden haze, the air heavy with the scent of blooms that had once been Lady Winthrop's pride. The garden, though still lovely, bore signs of neglect, overgrown hedges and wilted petals, mirroring the estate's faded glory. Miss Jane Marple, her black handbag tucked under her arm, had ventured here seeking Eleanor Winthrop, the young heir whose distress over the locket's disappearance seemed to carry a weight beyond mere sentiment. Eleanor's pale face and trembling hands at the auction had lingered in Miss Marple's mind, hinting at a deeper connection to the missing piece. With Inspector Craddock occupied interviewing Manor staff, Miss Marple saw her chance to speak with the girl alone, her gentle manner a key to unlocking guarded truths. She found Eleanor near a stone fountain, its basin cracked and dry, her slender figure bent over a rose bush as she pruned with unsteady hands. Her auburn hair was pinned loosely, strands escaping to frame her pale face, and her silk shawl hung unevenly as if thrown on in haste. The pruning shears moved erratically, snipping leaves more than stems, and Miss Marple noted the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes darted toward the manor as if expecting pursuit. "Good morning, my dear," Miss Marple said, her voice soft as a lullaby, her lavender cardigan catching the light as she approached. "Such a lovely garden, though it must be hard to tend it alone." Eleanor started, the shears slipping in her grip, and turned to face Miss Marple, her dark eyes wide with a mix of surprise and wariness. "Oh, Miss Marple," she said, her voice thin and brittle. "I didn't see you there." I just needed some air." She set the shears down on the fountain's edge, her hands twisting the edge of her shawl. Miss Marple smiled, settling onto a nearby bench, her movements slow and deliberate. "Quite understandable," she said. "All this fuss about the locket must be dreadfully upsetting, especially for you, with your family's history tied to it." Eleanor's lips pressed into a tight line, and she looked away, her gaze fixed on a distant rosebush. "It's just a locket," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why does everyone care so much?" The words were sharp, but Miss Marple caught the tremor beneath them, the way Eleanor's fingers clutched the shawl as if it were a lifeline. She recalled a young woman in St. Mary Mead, Mary Price, who had spoken with similar defensiveness when hiding a stolen ring to protect a family secret. Eleanor's agitation, Miss Marple thought, was not just grief. It was fear, perhaps of something the locket might reveal. She leaned forward slightly, her hands folded neatly over her handbag. "It's curious, isn't it?" she said, her tone conversational. "How small things can hold such meaning. In my village, we once had a girl who kept a locket with a curl of her brother's hair, a reminder of a promise she'd made. It meant the world to her, though no one else understood her story was gentle, a bridge to Eleanor's guarded heart." And she watched the girl's reaction closely. Eleanor's eyes flickered, and her hand rose to her throat, where a small pendant hung, its shape obscured beneath her shawl. Miss Marple's sharp gaze caught the outline, a locket perhaps, or something close to it. "Do you wear a locket, my dear?" she asked, her voice as mild as ever. Eleanor's hand dropped quickly, and she pulled the shawl tighter, her cheeks flushing. "No, it's just a trinket," she said, her words stumbling. "Nothing special." The denial was swift, but Miss Marple noted the way her eyes darted to the manor, as if fearing someone might overhear. She thought of the maid's comment to Inspector Craddock, that Eleanor had been seen near the locket's display just before its disappearance, not in the kitchen as she'd claimed. The discrepancy was small, but significant, and Miss Marple's mind turned to the possibility that Eleanor's distress was tied to more than loss. "You were so close to the locket at the auction," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but probing. "It must have been hard, seeing your family's treasures sold off. I imagine that locket meant a great deal to you." Her words were sympathetic, but her eyes were keen, watching for the truth beneath Eleanor's guarded exterior. The girl's face crumpled, and she sank onto the fountain's edge, her hands twisting in her lap. "It was Grandmamma's," she said, her voice breaking. She loved it, but it's gone now, so what does it matter?" Her words were laced with bitterness, but Miss Marple caught a deeper note, guilt perhaps, or a secret she dared not voice. She shifted on the bench, her knitting untouched in her bag, her mind weaving through the girl's responses. "Your grandmother, Lady Winthrop, was such a figure in the village," she said. "So strict, they say, but so elegant. I suppose she left many stories behind." Her comment was casual, but it was a deliberate nudge, testing Eleanor's reaction to her grandmother's memory. The girl's hands stilled, and her eyes darkened, a shadow crossing her face. "She was difficult," Eleanor said, her voice low. "She expected so much." "I never really knew her, but Mother said she was hard, especially after the accident." The word hung in the air, and Miss Marple noted the hesitation, the way Eleanor's fingers tightened on her shawl. The accident, Lady Winthrop's fall from a balcony decades ago, was a wound in the village's memory, whispered about in hushed tones. Miss Marple recalled the tales. A beautiful woman, a stormy marriage, a death that some called tragic, others suspicious. The locket, rumoured to hold her, miniature, was a link to that past, and Eleanor's reaction suggested she knew more than she admitted. "Such a sad end," Miss Marple said, her voice soft. "I suppose the locket was a reminder of happier times." Her question was gentle, but Eleanor flinched, her hand rising again to the pendant at her throat before dropping quickly. "It's just a piece of jewellery," Eleanor said, her voice sharp now, almost defiant. "Why does everyone keep asking about it?" She stood abruptly, the shears clattering to the ground, and turned toward the manor, her shawl slipping to reveal the pendant briefly. A small oval shape, etched with a faint design. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, but she kept her expression serene, as if she hadn't noticed. "I'm sorry, Miss Marple," Eleanor said, her voice softer now, tinged with regret. "I'm just tired. I should check on Aunt Beatrice." She hurried off, her steps uneven, leaving Miss Marple alone by the fountain. The garden was quiet now, save for the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Miss Marple remained on the bench, her thoughts turning over the encounter. Eleanor's distress was genuine, but her evasions, the pendant, the contradicted alibi, the mention of her grandmother's strictness, pointed to a secret she was desperate to protect. The pendant at her throat was a clue, perhaps the locket itself, or a decoy, hidden in plain sight. Miss Marple thought of a girl in her village, Sarah Trent, who had worn a stolen cameo to keep it close, unable to part with it despite the risk. Was Eleanor driven by a similar impulse, or was her motive tied to something darker? She considered the other suspects, Mr. Sloane's agitation, Mrs. Hargrove's ambition doctor. Hayward's curiosity, but Eleanor's personal tie to the locket set her apart. Her grandmother's legacy, the whispers of scandal, the pendant's hidden shape, all suggested the locket held more than a miniature. Was it a secret about Lady Winthrop's death, or something closer to Eleanor herself? Miss Marple recalled Doctor Hayward's pointed remark about the tragedy, and the glance he'd shared with Eleanor in the library. Did he know something that frightened her, or was she afraid of what he might uncover? Rising from the bench, Miss Marple adjusted her cardigan, her mind sharp and focused. She would need to speak with Beatrice, whose knowledge of the family might shed light on Eleanor's fears. The pendant, too, warranted closer scrutiny, perhaps a discreet question to the maid who'd seen Eleanor near the display. As she walked back to the manor, the roses nodding in the breeze, Miss Marple felt the threads of the mystery tightening. The locket was not just a trinket, it was a key to a truth Eleanor guarded, and Miss Marple would unravel it, one gentle question at a time. Chapter 8. The Family Secret. The drawing-room of Thornfield Manor, though still grand with its high ceilings and faded tapestries, felt oppressive under the weight of the unresolved theft. The late afternoon light slanted through the tall windows, casting intricate patterns on the worn carpet. But the air was thick with unspoken questions. Miss Jane Marple sat in a cushioned armchair near a small tea-table, her knitting resting untouched in her lap, her black handbag at her side. Mrs. Beatrice Winthrop, Eleanor's aunt, had insisted she stay for tea, her round face creased with worry as she fretted over the scandal that had engulfed the estate sale. Miss Marple, ever the patient listener, saw an opportunity to probe deeper into the Winthrop family's past, sensing that the locket's disappearance was tied to secrets buried in its history. Beatrice bustled in, carrying a silver tray with a teapot, cups, and a plate of slightly stale scones, a sign of the manor's dwindling resources. Her lace dress, a relic of better days, rustled as she set the tray down, her hands fluttering like nervous birds. "Oh, Jane, I'm at my wit's end," she said, her voice quivering as she poured the tea. "First the locket, now all this talk in the village. They're saying it's the Winthrop curse come back to haunt us." She sank into a chair, her cheeks flushed. and Miss Marple noted the genuine distress in her eyes. But also a flicker of something else, perhaps fear of what the locket might reveal. "Now, Beatrice," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing as she accepted a cup. "Village gossip is like dandelion seeds. It spreads but rarely takes root. I'm sure the locket will turn up. It's such a curious piece, though, isn't it? So tied to your family." Her words were gentle, but her eyes were sharp, watching Beatrice's reaction. The older woman's hand trembled slightly, spilling a drop of tea onto the saucer. "Oh, yes," she said, her voice a touch too bright. "It was my mother's, Lady Winthrop's. Just a sentimental thing, really." The dismissal was casual, but Miss Marple caught the quick glance toward the door, as if Beatrice feared being overheard. She sipped her tea, her movements deliberate, her mind turning over Beatrice's unease. "Lady Winthrop must have been a remarkable woman," she said, her voice soft. "I've heard such stories in St. Mary Mead, her beauty, her elegance, and that sad accident, of course." She paused, letting the words settle, knowing that mention of the tragedy often loosened tongues. Beatrice's fingers tightened on her cup, and she set it down with a faint clink. "Yes, a terrible thing," she said, her voice low. "She fell from the balcony, you know, at a ball. Everyone said it was an accident, but—" She trailed off, her eyes darting to the window, and Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her expression one of quiet sympathy. "But," she prompted gently, her tone inviting confidence. Beatrice hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. And then, perhaps loosened by the intimacy of the moment, or the glass of sherry she'd sipped earlier, she leaned closer. "There were rumours," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Mother was unhappy. Her marriage to my father wasn't always smooth. Some said she was pushed, or that well, you know how people talk." She stopped abruptly, her cheeks reddening as if she'd said too much. Miss Marple nodded, her face serene, but her mind was alert, piecing together the fragments of the Winthrop legacy. "And the locket?" she asked, her voice as mild as ever. "It's said to hold her miniature." "That must be precious to you." And Eleanor Beatrice's eyes widened, and she reached for her sherry glass, taking a quick sip. "Oh, it's just a portrait, I suppose," she said, her words rushed. "Mother loved it, always wore it." But it's nothing more than that her dismissal was too quick. And Miss Marple noted the way her hand trembled, the sherry sloshing slightly. She thought of a woman in her village, Mrs. Elwood, who had guarded a family secret with similar evasions, only to reveal it under gentle pressure. Beatrice, she sensed, knew more than she admitted. Miss Marple set her cup down, her eyes soft but searching. "In St. Mary Mead, we had a locket once," she said, her tone anecdotal, "passed down through a family. It held not a portrait, but a letter, a confession, really, about a child born out of wedlock. It caused quite a stir when it came to light. Her story was light, but its intent was clear." Beatrice's face paled, her hand gripping the arm of her chair. "A child," she said, her voice a whisper. "Oh, Jane, you do have the most curious tales." She laughed, a brittle sound, but her eyes betrayed her, flickering with something akin to panic. Miss Marple pressed gently, her voice unchanged. "Families have such secrets, don't they? I suppose Eleanor wouldn't know of such things, being so young." The mention of Eleanor was deliberate, and Beatrice's reaction was immediate. She stiffened, her sherry glass nearly tipping. "Eleanor?" "No, No, she knows nothing of anything like that, she said, her words tumbling over each other. She's just a girl, worried about the estate, that's all. The denial was vehement, but Miss Marple caught the hesitation. The way Beatrice's gaze darted toward the door where Eleanor had last been seen. The older woman's fear, she thought, was not just for the locket, but for what it might expose. The conversation paused as a maid entered, clearing the tea tray with a clatter that seemed to startle Beatrice. Miss Marple used the moment to observe her companion, noting the lines of strain around her mouth, the way her fingers twisted a lace handkerchief. The locket, she was certain, held more than a miniature, perhaps a clue to Lady Winthrop's scandal, or something closer to the present. She recalled Eleanor's pendant, hidden beneath her shawl. And Dr. Hayward's pointed remark about the family's past. Beatrice's evasions suggested she knew the locket's true significance, and her protectiveness of Eleanor hinted at a secret tied to the girl herself. Poor Eleanor, Miss Marple said, her tone sympathetic. She seemed so upset at the auction. I suppose the locket reminded her of her grandmother. Beatrice nodded, her eyes moist. It's all been too much for her, she said, losing the manor, now this. She loved her grandmother despite. Well, Mother was strict, you see, very strict. The admission was small, but Miss Marple seized on it, her mind turning to Eleanor's distress, her contradicted alibi, the pendant at her throat. Was the locket a symbol of love, or a burden of shame? As Beatrice reached for another scone, crumbling it nervously, Miss Marple's thoughts crystallized. The locket's disappearance was no mere theft. It was a desperate act to conceal a truth that threatened the Winthrop name. Beatrice's talk of rumours, her quick dismissal of a child, her fear for Eleanor, all pointed to a scandal buried in the family's past, one the locket might reveal. She thought of Mr. Sloane's agitation, Mrs. Hargrove's ambition, Dr. Hayward's curiosity, but Beatrice's words had shifted the puzzle's centre to Eleanor. The girl's fear, Miss Marple suspected, was not just for the locket, but for what it might expose about her family, or herself. Rising, Miss Marple smoothed her cardigan, her smile as warm as ever. "Thank you for the tea, Beatrice," she said. "I'm sure the locket will turn up soon." These things often do. Her words were kind, but her mind was racing, weaving together the threads of the mystery. As she left the drawing-room, the manor's silence seemed to hum with secrets, and Miss Marple resolved to watch Eleanor closely, to learn more about the pendant and the truth it might conceal. The locket, she knew, was a key to a past someone wished to keep hidden, and she would find it, one gentle step at a time. Chapter 9. The Clue in the Ashes. The evening shadows lengthened across Thornfield Manor, cloaking its ancient walls in a sombre hush. The air within was heavy with the lingering tension of the locket's disappearance, and the manor's grand rooms, once alive with the chatter of bidders, now echoed only with the soft footsteps of staff and the occasional murmur of Inspector Craddock's ongoing inquiries. Miss Jane Marple, her black handbag clasped firmly, had lingered at the manor. Her presence a quiet comfort to Mrs. Beatrice Winthrop, who was now resting upstairs, exhausted by the day's ordeal. Miss Marple, however, was far from idle. Her mind, sharp as the needles tucked in her knitting bag, turned over the threads of the mystery. Mr. Sloane's agitation, Mrs. Hargrove's ambition, Doctor, Hayward's curiosity, and Eleanor's guarded fear. A new clue discovered by chance, was about to deepen the puzzle, and Miss Marple's instincts told her it was a pivotal piece. She had wandered into the drawing room, where the auction's remnants, unsold lots and scattered bidding paddles, still lay in disarray. The fireplace, cold now, drew her attention. Its hearth littered with ashes from a fire lit the previous evening to ward off the September chill. Miss Marple, with her knack for noticing what others overlooked, bent closer, her lavender cardigan brushing the hearthstone as she peered into the grey dust. There, among the ashes, was a singed scrap of paper, no larger than a calling card. Its edges curled and blackened. She retrieved it with care, using a handkerchief to avoid smudging any trace, and held it to the fading light. The paper bore the faint outline of a rose, its lines delicate but unmistakable, mirroring the engraving on the missing locket. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, her mind racing. The paper was not the locket itself, but its presence in the ashes suggested intent. Someone had tried to destroy it, perhaps to mislead or conceal. She turned it over, noting a waxy texture and a faint scent of tobacco, sharp and distinctive, not unlike the odour she detected on Mr. Sloane's coat. In St. Mary Mead, she had once found a burned letter in a vicar's fireplace, its fragments revealing a theft that had shaken the parish. This scrap, she thought, was no accident. It was a clue, deliberate or not, left by someone who knew the locket's significance. She tucked the paper carefully into her handbag, resolving to examine it further, and straightened, her thoughts turning to the auctioneer. Mr. Sloane's claim of never smoking clashed with the tobacco scent, and she recalled the cigar lounge in Danemouth, known for its distinctive paper wrappers used for notes or receipts. Had Sloane been there, perhaps plotting to swap the locket with a decoy? The rose design suggested a connection to the locket, but its purpose was unclear. A sketch for a buyer, a note about its value, or something more personal? Miss Marple's mind flicked to the other suspects, each with their own ties to the locket. But Sloane's access to the display case made him a likely candidate for such a ploy. She moved to a nearby chair, her movements slow but deliberate, and sat, her eyes scanning the room. The empty glass case still stood on the velvet-draped table, its brass lock gleaming faintly. Inspector Craddock had found no signs of tampering, but Miss Marple knew that locks could be opened with skill as easily as with force. She thought of Eleanor's pendant, hidden beneath her shawl, and Mrs. Hargrove's gold chain, glimpsed in her suite. Dr. Hayward's knowledge of the Winthrop family lingered in her mind too. His glance at Eleanor in the library, a moment of unspoken tension. The scrap of paper, though, pointed most directly to Sloane, and Miss Marple resolved to pursue this thread, perhaps by inquiring about the Deanmouth lounge or examining Sloane's ledgers for signs of deceit. As she sat, a soft noise drew her attention, a rustle from the hallway. She rose, her handbag clutched tightly, and stepped quietly to the door, peering out. The corridor was empty, but a faint creak suggested someone had passed by, perhaps listening. She thought of Eleanor's nervous glances, her contradicted alibi, and wondered if the girl had been near, drawn by the same fireplace. Or was it Sloane, anxious about what might be found? Miss Marple's instincts, honed by years of observing human nature, told her the manor held more secrets, and the ashes were only the beginning. She returned to the fireplace, her eyes scanning the hearth for further clues, but found only cold ash and a few charred twigs. The scrap of paper was enough, a tangible link to the locket's fate. She considered its implications, a sketch perhaps, meant to mimic the locket's design, or a note tied to its history. Beatrice's revelation about Lady Winthrop's rumoured scandal, a child born out of wedlock, echoed in her mind. The locket, said to hold a miniature, might contain a portrait of that child, not Lady Winthrop, a secret that could shatter the family's reputation. Had someone burned the paper to hide this truth, or to mislead the search? Miss Marple's thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of a young maid, her apron crisp but her face anxious. "Miss Marple, ma'am," she said, curtsying. "Mrs. Winthrop asks if you'll join her for supper. She's ever so upset," Miss Marple smiled, her expression warm, but her mind elsewhere. "Of course, my dear," she said. "I'll be along shortly." As the maid left, Miss Marple took one last look at the fireplace, the ashes now a silent witness to her discovery. She thought of Sloane's trembling hands, Hargrove's sharp accusations, Hayward's scholarly probing, and Eleanor's hidden pendant. The scrap of paper tied them together, but its meaning was still elusive. She left the drawing-room, her steps soft on the worn carpet, her mind weaving the clues into a pattern. The tobacco scent linked the paper to Sloane, but Eleanor's fear, Hargrove's ambition, and Hayward's knowledge could not be dismissed. The locket, she was certain, was hidden close, perhaps in the manor, perhaps on someone's person. She recalled a case in Sayent, Mary Mead, where a stolen ring had been found in a fireplace, its owner hoping the flames would erase her guilt. This paper, though, was not the locket. It was a decoy, a distraction, or a mistake, and Miss Marple would unravel its purpose. As she approached the dining room, the scent of roast lamb drifting through the hall, Miss Marple resolved to keep the paper's discovery quiet for now. Craddock, with his methodical approach, would seize on it, but she preferred to let the suspects reveal themselves through their actions. She would ask about the Danemouth lounge, perhaps through a village contact, and watch Sloane closely for signs of guilt. Eleanor's pendant, too, needed investigation. Its shape, so like the locket's, was no coincidence. The truth, Miss Marple knew, was near, hidden in the ashes and the silences of Thornfield Manor, and she would find it, one careful step at a time. Chapter 10. The Confrontation. The drawing-room of Thornfield Manor, bathed in the soft glow of evening lamps, was a stage set for revelation. The heavy velvet drapes were drawn against the September dusk, and the air was taut with anticipation, as if the very walls held their breath. Miss Jane Marple had requested a gathering of the key figures in the locket's disappearance, her gentle insistence cloaked in the guise of aiding Inspector Craddock, who now stood by the fireplace, his notebook tucked away, his expression one of reluctant curiosity. Miss Marple sat in her familiar armchair, her lavender cardigan neatly buttoned, her knitting bag at her side, its contents untouched. Her eyes, bright and bird-like, surveyed the room with a serene confidence that belied the storm she was about to unleash. Mr. Percival Sloane stood near the podium, his wiry frame rigid, his moustache twitching as he adjusted his tie with nervous fingers. Mrs. Clara Hargrove sat stiffly on a brocade sofa, her silk blouse crisp, her pearls gleaming, her sharp eyes darting between Miss Marple and the empty glass case on the velvet-draped table. Dr. Lawrence Hayward leaned against a bookcase, his spectacles catching the lamplight. his scholarly calm a thin veneer over an alertness Miss Marple had noted before. Eleanor Winthrop hovered near the French windows, her auburn hair loose, her silk shawl clutched tightly, her face pale as moonlight. Mrs. Beatrice Winthrop, wringing her lace handkerchief, sat beside Eleanor, her round face creased with worry. The room was a tableau of motives, each figure a thread in the tapestry Miss Marple had been weaving since the locket vanished. "Thank you all for coming," Miss Marple began, her voice as gentle as a village breeze, yet carrying a quiet authority that stilled the room. "I know this has been a trying time, with the locket's disappearance causing such distress. But I believe we're close to the truth, and a few words may bring it to light." Her eyes moved from face to face, noting Sloane's stiffening posture, Hargrove's narrowed gaze, Hayward's subtle shift, and Eleanor's quick intake of breath. Craddock, arms crossed, gave her a nod, his skepticism tempered by respect for her uncanny knack for unravelling mysteries. She turned first to Mr. Sloane, her tone mild but precise. "Mr. Sloane, you've insisted the locket was secure in its case, locked with your key. Yet I found something curious in the fireplace. A scrap of paper, singed, with a rose design matching the locket's engraving." She produced the handkerchief-wrapped fragment from her handbag, holding it up for all to see. Sloane's face flushed, his hands clenching. "That's nothing to do with me," he blurted, his voice sharp. "I don't know how it got there." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression serene. "Perhaps not," she said, "but the paper smells of tobacco, much like your coat, though you claim not to smoke. In St. Mary Mead, we had a grocer who hid his habit, and it led us to a theft. Were you planning a switch, perhaps, to sell the locket privately?" Sloane's eyes widened, his moustache quivering. "Preposterous," he said, but his voice cracked, and Miss Marple noted the sweat beading on his brow. "I checked the locket, yes, but I locked the case." "Someone else must have taken it." His defense was vehement, but Miss Marple's calm gaze held him, and the room felt the weight of her words. She thought of the Danemouth cigar lounge, its distinctive paper wrappers, and resolved to confirm Sloane's visits later. But for now, his agitation was clue enough. She turned to Mrs. Hargrove, her voice unchanged. "Mrs. Hargrove, your passion for antiques is well known, and your disappointment at losing the locket was clear. I couldn't help but notice a gold chain in your room at the inn so like the locket's. Were you planning to claim it, perhaps before it vanished?" Hargrove's face hardened, her pearls clicking as she leaned forward. "How dare you?" she snapped. "That chain is mine, a trinket, nothing more. I was bidding on a vase when the locket was taken. Finch can confirm it." Her assistant, hovering in the background, nodded vigorously, but Miss Marple caught the nervous twitch in her hands. Hargrove's indignation was fierce, but her quick deflection suggested she had more to hide than a collector's zeal. Miss Marple's gaze shifted to Dr. Hayward, her tone still gentle. "Dr. Hayward, your knowledge of the Winthrop family is remarkable. Your remark about Lady Winthrop's death, and your interest in the locket's craftsmanship, suggest you suspected it held more than a miniature. Were you seeking it for its historical value, or perhaps to uncover a secret that could be leveraged?" Hayward's spectacles glinted as he adjusted them, his smile tight. "I'm a scholar, Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth. "My interest is academic. I was across the room when the locket vanished, as Mr. Grayson confirmed his alibi was steady, but Miss Marple noted the way his fingers brushed his cufflinks, a nervous habit that betrayed his calm. Finally, she turned to Eleanor, her eyes softening, but her words firm. "Eleanor, my dear, you were seen near the Locket's display, not in the kitchen as you claimed. Your pendant, hidden beneath your shawl, is so like the Locket's shape. And your distress, it's more than grief, isn't it?" The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Eleanor's face crumpled, her hands clutching her shawl as tears welled in her eyes. Beatrice gasped, reaching for her niece, but Eleanor stepped back, her voice a whisper. I didn't mean to," she began, then stopped, her eyes darting to the floor. Miss Marple rose, her movement slow but deliberate, and approached the girl. "The locket holds a secret, doesn't it?" she said gently. "Not just a miniature of your grandmother, but something more. A truth you feared would come to light." She turned to Beatrice, whose face was ashen, her handkerchief twisted into knots. "Mrs. Winthrop, you spoke of rumours, of a child born out of wedlock. The locket, I believe, holds a portrait of that child, not Lady Winthrop. And Eleanor, you knew this, didn't you?" Her voice was kind, but the room felt the weight of her revelation, each word a stitch pulling the mystery tight. Eleanor's shoulders shook, and she sank onto a chair, her shawl slipping to reveal the pendant, a small gold oval, etched with roses. "It's not the locket," she whispered, her voice breaking. It's mine, but I took the other one. I had to." The admission hung in the air, and Craddock stepped forward, his eyes wide, but Miss Marple raised a hand, her expression calm. "Let her speak," she said softly, and the room waited, the truth poised to unfold. Sloane's bluster, Hargrove's indignation, and Hayward's composure seemed to fade as Eleanor's words echoed, the heart of the mystery laid bare. Miss Marple's eyes never left the girl, her mind already tracing the final threads. Beatrice's fear, the burned paper, the locket's hidden truth. The confrontation had set the stage, and now she knew the full story would emerge, revealing the secret that had driven Eleanor to act. Chapter 11. The Confession, the drawing room of Thornfield Manor, its lamplight casting soft shadows on the faded tapestries, was a crucible of tension. The air seemed to pulse with the weight of Eleanor Winthrop's whispered admission. Her words, "I took the locket," hanging like a storm cloud over the gathered figures. Miss Jane Marple stood calmly, her lavender cardigan neat, her black handbag resting on the chair behind her, her eyes gentle but unwavering as they fixed on the trembling girl. Inspector Craddock, poised by the fireplace, had halted his step forward, heeding Miss Marple's quiet command to let Eleanor speak. Mr. Percival Sloane's face was flushed, his hands clenched at his sides. Mrs. Clara Hargrove sat rigid, her pearls glinting with cold light. "Doctor!" Lawrence Hayward's spectacles caught the lamplight as he leaned forward, his scholarly calm fraying, and Mrs. Beatrice Winthrop, clutching her lace handkerchief, stared at her niece with a mix of horror and pity. The room was a tableau of held breaths, waiting for the truth to unfurl. Eleanor sat hunched in her chair, her auburn hair falling loose, her silk shawl slipping to the floor to reveal the small gold pendant at her throat, its rose etching a faint echo of the missing locket. Her hands twisted together, her voice barely audible as she continued, her eyes fixed on the carpet. "I didn't mean to cause such trouble," she said, her words choked with tears. I couldn't let it be sold. Not to strangers, not to anyone." She glanced up at Miss Marple, her dark eyes pleading for understanding, and the old lady nodded, her expression kind but firm, encouraging the girl to go on. Miss Marple stepped closer, her voice as soft as a whisper in a church. "Tell us, my dear," she said, "why the locket meant so much. It's more than a family heirloom, isn't it?" Her question was gentle, but it carried the weight of her deductions, drawn from Beatrice's hints of scandal, the singed paper in the ashes, and Eleanor's own guarded behaviour. She thought of a young woman in St. Mary Mead, Ellen Carter, who had confessed to stealing a family Bible to hide a shameful entry in its pages. Eleanor's distress, she sensed, was born of a similar need to protect. Eleanor's shoulders shook, and she drew a shuddering breath. "It's about my mother," she said, her voice breaking. "The locket, it doesn't hold Grandmama's portrait. It holds hers. My mother, she wasn't born in wedlock." The words tumbled out, raw and painful, and Beatrice gasped, her handkerchief pressed to her mouth. Sloane shifted uncomfortably. Hargrove's eyes narrowed, and Hayward's hand paused on his cufflinks, his face unreadable. Miss Marple remained still, her mind fitting the confession into the pattern she had woven. "Go on, Eleanor," she said, her tone steady, her eyes never leaving the girl. "You knew this, and you feared what the locket would reveal." Eleanor nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Mother told me before she died," she said, "she was Grandmama's secret, born from an affair. Grandmama hid it, sent her away to be raised by relatives. The locket was all Mother had of her, a miniature painted when she was a child. Grandmama kept it, wore it always, but no one knew what it meant. When Mother died, I couldn't bear the thought of it being sold, of people finding out. It would ruin her memory, ruin everything." Beatrice's voice broke in, trembling with emotion. "Oh, Eleanor, why didn't you tell me?" she said, reaching for her niece, but Eleanor pulled away, her face crumpling. "You didn't know, Aunt Beatrice." "Grandmama never told you. I found out only last year, when Mother was ill. She made me promise to keep it secret. The locket, it was proof, and I couldn't let it go to someone like—" She glanced at Mrs. Hargrove, then quickly away, her words trailing off. Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning over the girl's story. The locket's true contents, a portrait of Eleanor's mother, the hidden child of Lady Winthrop, explained Beatrice's evasions, Eleanor's fear, and the urgency of the theft. She recalled the singed paper in the fireplace, its rose design a match for the locket, and saw its purpose now. "The paper in the ashes," she said, holding up the handkerchief-wrapped fragment, "was a sketch, wasn't it? Something you made to mislead Mr. Sloane, to make him think the locket was still there." Eleanor's eyes widened, and she nodded, her voice a whisper. "I drew it," she said. I took the locket during the bidding, when everyone was distracted by the vase. I slipped it from the case. Mr. Sloane had left it unlocked for a moment when he checked it earlier. I put the sketch in its place, hoping it would buy time. I was going to destroy the locket, burn it, but I couldn't. It's all I have left of Mother." She reached into her pocket, her hand trembling, and produced the locket, its gold surface glinting in the lamplight, the rose engraven clear and delicate. She set it on the table, her fingers lingering as if reluctant to let it go. Craddock stepped forward, his face a mix of surprise and relief, but Miss Marple raised a hand, her gaze still on Eleanor. "You burned the sketch in the fireplace, didn't you?" she said, "to cover your tracks." Eleanor nodded, her tears falling freely now. "I panicked," she said. "I thought if no one found the sketch, they'd think the locket was stolen by someone else. I didn't know what else to do." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but she turned to the others, her voice calm but incisive. "Mr. Sloane," she said, "your agitation was understandable, but the tobacco scent on your coat led me to wonder if you'd planned a swap yourself, perhaps with the sketch as a decoy." Sloane blustered, his face red. "I swear I had no part in it. I don't smoke, and that paper's nothing to do with me." His denial was fierce, but Miss Marple noted the sweat on his brow, the way his eyes avoided the locket. She suspected he had considered profiting from the sale, perhaps through a private buyer, but Eleanor's act had preempted him. To Mrs. Hargrove, she said, "Your ambition for the locket was clear, and the gold chain in your room suggested you might have planned to claim it by other means." Hargrove's face tightened, her voice icy. "I've done nothing wrong, Miss Marple." "My interest was legitimate." Her words were sharp, but Miss Marple caught the flicker of relief in her eyes. Relief, perhaps, that her own secrets remained untouched. "To Dr. Hayward," she said, "your knowledge of the Winthrop family hinted at a deeper interest, perhaps in the scandal the locket could reveal." Hayward adjusted his spectacles, his voice steady. "I was curious, yes, but I had no hand in this." His calm was intact, but Miss Marple noted the tension in his posture, as if he regretted probing too close to the truth. She turned back to Eleanor, her expression kind. "You acted out of love, my dear," she said, "but secrets have a way of coming to light. The locket is safe now, and your mother's memory need not be tarnished." Eleanor sobbed, burying her face in her hands, and Beatrice moved to comfort her, tears in her own eyes. Craddock took the locket, examining it with a mix of admiration and exasperation. "Well, Miss Marple," he said, "you've done it again. I'd have spent weeks on this." Miss Marple smiled, her hands folded neatly. "Just a matter of listening, Inspector," she said. The room exhaled, the tension easing, but Miss Marple's mind lingered on the locket, its rose engraving a silent testament to a family's hidden pain. The truth was out, but the threads of motive, Sloane's greed, Hargrove's ambition, Hayward's curiosity, still lingered. A reminder that even in confession, some secrets remained. Chapter 12. The Resolution. The drawing-room of Thornfield Manor, its lamplight now softened by the deepening night, seemed to exhale as Eleanor Winthrop's confession settled over the gathered company. The locket, its gold surface etched with delicate roses, lay on the velvet-draped table, a silent witness to the truth that had finally emerged. Miss Jane Marple stood quietly, her lavender cardigan neat, her black handbag resting beside her untouched knitting. Her eyes gentle but keen as they moved from Eleanor's tear-streaked face to the others, Mr. Percival Sloane, Mrs. Clara Hargrove, Dr. Lawrence Hayward, and Mrs. Beatrice Winthrop, each grappling with the revelation in their own way. Inspector Craddock, holding the locket with a mixture of relief and bemusement, glanced at Miss Marple, his respect for her quiet genius evident in his nod. The mystery was solved, but the air still hummed with the echoes of secrets, and Miss Marple knew the final threads needed tying before the manor could find peace. Eleanor sat slumped in her chair, her auburn hair falling across her face, her hands clasped tightly as if to anchor herself against the weight of her admission. Beatrice, her aunt, hovered beside her, her lace handkerchief damp with tears, her round face a mask of sorrow and relief. "Oh, Eleanor, my dear," she murmured, her voice trembling, "why didn't you tell me?" "We could have faced this together." Eleanor shook her head, her voice a whisper. "I couldn't, Aunt Beatrice. Mother made me promise. I thought I was protecting her." Miss Marple watched the exchange, her heart softening for the girl's burden, but her mind remained sharp, noting the reactions of the others. Craddock cleared his throat, his practical nature reasserting itself. "Well, Miss Winthrop," he said, his tone firm but not unkind, "you've caused quite a stir, but the locket's safe now. I'll need to take a formal statement, but given the circumstances," he trailed off, glancing at Miss Marple, who nodded slightly, her expression serene. She understood his hesitation. Eleanor's act was born of love, not malice, and the Winthrop name carried weight in St. Mary Mead. A public scandal, she knew, would serve no one, and Craddock seemed inclined to agree. Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice as gentle as a summer breeze. "Inspector, if I may," she said, her eyes moving to Eleanor. "The locket belongs with the family, don't you think? Its secret is safe, and I believe Eleanor has learned the cost of keeping it hidden." Eleanor looked up, her eyes wide with gratitude, and Beatrice clasped her hand, tears spilling anew. Craddock hesitated, then nodded, slipping the locket into a small evidence bag. "I'll return it to Mrs. Winthrop after the paperwork's done," he said. "No charges, I think, if the family agrees." Beatrice nodded vigorously, her relief palpable, and Eleanor's shoulders sagged as if a great weight had lifted. Miss Marple turned to Mr. Sloane, whose face was still flushed, his moustache twitching with unease. "Mr. Sloane," she said, her tone mild but pointed, "your firm's reputation is intact, but I'd advise greater care with your lots, and perhaps a visit to that cigar lounge in Danemouth less often." Her mention of the lounge, tied to the tobacco-scented paper, was deliberate, and Sloane's eyes widened, his hands fumbling with his tie. I'll see to it," he stammered, his bluster deflated. Miss Marple suspected he had considered profiting from the locket, perhaps through a private sale, but Eleanor's theft had thwarted any such plan. His chastened demeanour suggested he would be more cautious in future, and she let the matter rest, her point made. To Mrs. Hargrove, she said, "Mrs. Hargrove, your collection will have to wait for another prize, I'm afraid." The locket was never meant for auction. Hargrove's lips tightened, her pearls glinting as she rose, her posture rigid. "I came for a fair purchase," she said, her voice icy. "But I see this village prefers its secrets to honest trade." She swept from the room, her assistant Miss Finch scurrying behind, and Miss Marple noted the collector's dented pride. The gold chain in her suite, so like the lockets, remained a question. But without evidence of theft, Miss Marple let it pass. Certain Hargrove's ambition would find another target. Dr. Hayward, still leaning against the bookcase, adjusted his spectacles, his scholarly air intact but strained. "Dr. Hayward," Miss Marple said, her voice soft, "your curiosity about the Winthrop family is understandable, but some histories are best left in books." Hayward's smile was tight, his fingers brushing his cufflinks. "I meant no harm," he said, his voice steady. "Just an interest in the past." Miss Marple nodded, but her eyes held his for a moment, sensing his disappointment. His knowledge of Lady Winthrop's tragedy had likely fueled his pursuit of the locket, perhaps hoping to uncover a scandal for his studies. With the truth revealed, his quest was over, and he retreated to the library, his steps slow. As the room emptied, Craddock gathered his notes, shaking his head with a wry smile. "Miss Marple, you've a knack for this," he said. "I'd have been chasing fingerprints for weeks." She smiled, her hands folded neatly. "Just a matter of noticing, Inspector," she said. "People are much like my knitting. Pull the right thread, and the pattern appears." He chuckled, tipping his hat, and left to finalize his report, the locket secure in his care. Miss Marple lingered, watching as Beatrice led Eleanor upstairs, the girl's steps slow but lighter, as if unburdened. The locket's secret, a child born out of wedlock, hidden to preserve the Winthrop name, was safe, its revelation confined to this room. Miss Marple thought of her village, where secrets often lay buried in family Bibles or old letters, surfacing only when prodded by necessity. Eleanor's act, born of love for her mother, was a reminder of the lengths to which loyalty could drive a heart. She gathered her handbag and knitting, her thoughts turning to the manor's quiet gardens, the roses that had witnessed so much. As she walked to the door, the locket's image lingered in her mind, its rose engraving a symbol of beauty and pain. The truth had been found, not in grand gestures, but in the small details. The singed paper, the hidden pendant, the whispered fears. She stepped into the cool night, the stars bright above St. Mary Mead, and made her way home, her cottage waiting with its familiar comforts. The locket, now locked away in the Winthrop family's care, would trouble the village no more. But Miss Marple knew that secrets, like roses, had a way of blooming again. And she would be ready, her gentle eyes ever watchful.